Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. On the 28th of March, the Prime Minister said about his entire corporate tax giveaway, and I quote, "We will be committed to it today, and we'll be committed to it at the next election." Does the Prime Minister stand by his answer?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I do. And, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition stands too by his and his party's assessment of a reduction in tax as a giveaway. That's right. And what does that mean? You can't give away something you don't own. And so what the Labor Party says, what they believe is that every profit, every dollar of income earned by an Australian business belongs by right to the government. And so any reduction in tax is a giveaway. This is the hubris of the Labor Party. So contemptuous are they of the people whose hard work and enterprise has created, since September 2013, 1,013,600 new jobs in Australia. So contemptuous are them that they regard every dollar they earn as belonging to the government, and whatever is left of them after tax as nothing more than a gift given in the mercy and charity of the Labor Party. Mr Speaker, we know better than that. We know that our economy, our strong economy, and all of the essential services on which it relies depends on those hard-working Australian businesses. The Labor Party has made it very clear. It does not simply oppose the future elements of the enterprise tax plan that have not been legislated. It wants to repeal the tax cuts for millions of small and medium Australian family-owned businesses. That's what they want to do. They want to go to all those businesses, whether they are in Longman or in Braddon or in Fremantle in Perth or Mayo or in any electorate. They want to go to them and say to them, we're going to jack up your tax. We're going to jack up your tax. And then will they take responsibility as the economy weakens, as people lose opportunities, as jobs diminish, as the ability of Australians to realise their dreams would be dimmed by the Labor Party and its relentless attack on business. Mr Speaker, we stand for enterprise, we stand for Australians getting ahead, we stand with business investing, and we stand above all for jobs. And we have the runs on the board. 415,000 jobs last year, the most in any year in our history. We promised jobs and growth in 2016, and, Mr Speaker, now in 2018 we are delivering.
The member for BOWMAN.
Thanks, Speaker. A question to the Prime Minister on that same theme. Will the Prime Minister update the House on how the budget is building a stronger economy and guaranteeing the services Australians rely on, including in my electorate of BOWMAN, and is the Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank the honourable member for his question, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, last week the honourable member and I joined many of his constituents in Cleveland to talk about the budget, to talk about the opportunities it was providing, and it was received with great enthusiasm, Mr Speaker. It was because they knew, the honourable member's constituents knew there in Cleveland, how important it is to continue to deliver stronger economic growth. They know that that is what enables record funding for hospitals and schools, more medicines on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, more affordable childcare, fully funding the NDIS, and ensuring our security agencies have the resources they need to keep us safe. And they know it's the foundation on which 1,013,600 jobs have been created. They know it is that stronger economy that is being enabled by our national economic plan that is enabling Australians to get on and get ahead. It's what's enabling us to provide tax relief for hard-working Australian families,
the member for Patterson,
starting with middle-income families and families on lower incomes, and then building up over 7 years a complete personal income tax plan that will ensure that 94% of Australians do not pay more than 32.5 cents in the dollar on new income. Mr Speaker, it encourages incentive, it encourages aspiration, it encourages work, it encourages enterprise. And those are the values that are driving stronger economic growth in Australia. And Mr Speaker, there is an alternative, and it is a bleak one, and it's represented by the honourable members opposite. They're the ones, Mr Speaker, the honourable member for BOWMAN and I saw many of their would-be victims at Cleveland. We saw all those retirees. Oh, the honourable members opposite can shout. They are going after the savings and the income of some of our older Australians who deserve respect and support. 28% of people's income being snatched away in a $5 billion a year tax grab. That is what the Labor Party is planning to do, and Australians know that that is a cynical tax grab designed to undermine their prospects in retirement. Mr Speaker, they know that the extra funding for hospitals, for schools, for national security, for infrastructure depend on the strong economy Australians are building and our economic plan is enabling, and the greatest threat to that is the Labor Party and the member opposite.
Just before I call the Leader of the Opposition, I've asked the members for Paterson, Ballarat, and I'm now asking the member for Lyons to cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that his government has made a secret deal with Senator Pauline Hanson's One Nation political party to ensure the passage of its big business tax cuts?
The Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. And, Mr Speaker, as the honourable member is well aware, as the Leader of the Opposition is well aware, owing to the anti-business arrangement, coalition between Labor and the Greens, owing to their refusal to support measures that will encourage employment, or, to quote the Leader of the Opposition, will encourage more investment, higher productivity, more jobs and better wages. That was then, that was a few years ago. Because of their concerted opposition to reducing business taxes on this and in so many other measures, we have to seek the support of the crossbench, and we do so with respect, we do so constructively, and we have all of those negotiations are conducted, as indeed they are from time to time, with the opposition, in confidence and with the respect that comes from that. And the honourable member would also know that the delivery of those tax cuts already, the ones that were secured in the teeth of Labor opposition, are already delivering the jobs that are ensuring we have stronger revenues and lower expenses in our budget, that is enabling us to bring the budget back into balance a year early, that is enabling us to spend an additional $30 billion a year on hospitals, in the public hospitals, in the next hospital funding agreement. And I might say, Mr Speaker, I hope the honourable member, the Leader of the Opposition, is getting ready with a bit of paint to fix up an extraordinarily dishonest and lying billboard that the Labor Party has parading around the electorate of Longman, which claims we are cutting millions of dollars from a public hospital in Queensland. We're spending more money on Queensland every year, more money on public hospitals in Queensland every year. And the new public hospitals deal offers over $7.5 billion, $7.5 billion, Mr Speaker, over 5 years in additional funding, 34% increase in funding. So the Labor Party omits or forgets to remember, Mr Speaker, that you don't make a lie true by repeating it again and again. Labor is lying about hospitals, it's lying about schools, it's lying about all the essential services that we are funding and guaranteeing and delivering because of the strong economy our policies have enabled and their policies threaten.
The member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the budget is delivering for North and Central Queensland, including for families in my electorate of Capricornia? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Capricornia for her question. I was particularly pleased to be with her in Rockhampton last week as we spoke to businesses, as we spoke to others in the community, Mr Speaker, about the budget, because the budget is a plan for a stronger economy, and it's a stronger economy that we've seen become stronger under this government, Mr Speaker, so much stronger that 1 million jobs have been created. 1 million jobs have been created since the election of the coalition government in 2013. And those jobs, Mr Speaker, have been particularly on show in Queensland. In the last year, the strongest growth of jobs on record, on economic record in Australia, 1 in 5 of those jobs were created in Queensland. And that's great news for Queenslanders, whether they're in Longman or whether they're in Capricornia or anywhere in Queensland. 1 in 5 of those jobs created in Queensland. And whether it's Coxon's Radiators, where I stood with the member for Capricornia and talked about the success of their businesses, who the Labor Party want to put their taxes up, not make them more competitive, Mr Speaker. But the real thing about the issue for North Queensland and Central Queensland is we're continuing to back in the stronger economy in Central and North Queensland. And that includes the commitment we made, $175 million to the Rookwood Weir, $500 million to support the livelihoods and the jobs that depend on the sound environmental management of the Great Barrier Reef. It depends on the $10 billion that is there to boost the Bruce Highway and fix the issues on the Bruce Highway, including $400 million for the Horton River Bridge, which is known to the member for Dawson very well, $121 million to the Rockhampton Northern Access Road, an important piece of infrastructure up there in Central and North Queensland, $1.5 billion for Northern Australian roads as part of the Roads of Strategic Importance initiative, which the Minister for Infrastructure and the Deputy Prime Minister has announced, and further funding for building better regions as well as part of the budget. These are the investments that the Turnbull government is making in a stronger economy for Australia and a stronger economy in North and Central Queensland. And in Townsville, of course, I had the opportunity to visit the site where $100 million is being invested as part of the city deal. Now, that's part of $250 million, every cent of which will be invested in Townsville as part of the package of measures we've committed to infrastructure in Townsville. And the great news about that project of the stadium being built with $100 million of support from the Turnbull government is this: 230 North Queensland businesses are working on that site. 85% of trade packages have gone to North Queensland businesses. 240 individuals have been inducted onto the site to work on that site, and by hours worked, the Indigenous representation in that is over 20%, Mr Speaker. This is a government that believes in North and Central Queensland and is investing accordingly.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister now tell the Australian people the details of his secret deal with Senator Pauline Hanson to ensure the passage of his big business tax cuts?
No secret deal, enough.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Honourable member for his question. And, Mr Speaker, I remind the honourable member that he's quite familiar with the need to work with the crossbench. In fact, in 2009, on this very topic, he did. No, he did. He's been aware of this for a long time. He has. He's an authority on the importance of cutting tax. He is. He wrote a book about cutting tax. And then in 2009, he said, we're focused on getting the budget through. And that will mean that, as in the budget, with most other legislative matters, very intense negotiation with the crossbenchers in particular. He says that means when we go into discussions of a very intense nature with the minor parties and there's often brinksmanship to the last minute. Well, Mr Speaker, I could go on, but it does seem the honourable member is very familiar. The reality is, Mr Speaker, that we will continue to negotiate respectfully with the crossbench in the Senate on all the measures that the Labor Party and the Greens decide to try to block. We respect every member of the Senate and we give them the courtesy and the confidence of negotiations. But, Mr Speaker, the important thing is that when those negotiations are concluded and legislation is passed, all is before the Australian public.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. The member for Kennedy.
Prime Minister, is the PM aware that there are 1.4 million temporary visa workers in Australia, the highest in the OECD? In fact, 3.6 million workers, half the entire Australian workforce, was born overseas. The threat of deportation renders foreign workers docile, supine and super cheap, ensuring they, not Australians, get the jobs. Whilst imported cultural and spiritual values inundate us, still 600,000 people pour into Australia each year. They seek the 200,000 new jobs already sought by over 200,000 school leavers. PM, you inherited this situation from Labor, but will you fix it?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm glad the honourable member in the last part of his question acknowledged the Olympic-class performance of the Leader of the Opposition in issuing 457 visas, who, of course, was issuing them for people to work in McDonald's, Hungry Jack's and KFC. Mr Speaker, we have done more than any government before us to make sure that Australians are given priorities for jobs in Australia. Our policies are ensuring that our migration program is targeted and reflects the genuine needs of the economy. Our migration program operates in the national interest of Australia and Australia alone. That is its objective. It's a recruitment exercise. Our job is to ensure that nobody comes to Australia that we do not need or want. And it is the sovereign right of the Australian people, exercised through their government, to determine that. And of course we saw when Labor was in office how they outsourced migration policy to people smugglers and criminals. That won't be happening again. Although if Jed Carney, sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr Speaker, if the member for BOWMAN apparently has its way, that will be on again. Now, we have an excellent program, and I want to describe to the honourable member some of the details in it. Of the people migrating to Australia, 68% are skilled migrants, 32% are from family visa streams. And so, of the family visa stream, 79% are partners, husbands or wives, 14% are parents, 6% are children, and the 1% fall into other categories. The skilled program is split between employer-sponsored, skilled independent and state and territory and regional nominated visas. Now, Mr Speaker, the big difference is that we ensure that everybody that comes here comes because they are needed or wanted. And we had in 2016-17 the permanent migration program was 183,608 places, and that was roughly 2/3 skilled stream and 1/3 family places. So I can assure the honourable member that the migration program, which is being excellently managed by the Minister for Home Affairs and ministers, it is one that operates in the interests of our nation and no other nation. That's our commitment, and we're determined to ensure that the mistakes, the follies and the tragedies that occasioned Labor's abandonment of border protection will never happen again.
The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government is delivering essential services and infrastructure for regional Victorians, including in my election of Dunkley? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for his question. He knows that the budget is a plan for a stronger economy. A plan for a stronger economy, an economy that has, under this government, delivered over 1 million jobs now. 1 million jobs delivered around Australia. That is something that was a solemn pledge that the member for McMahon didn't believe could happen, but it's one that we believe could happen, and we went to work and set about achieving it together with the businesses and Australians all around the country going out there and getting those jobs. But we know that a stronger economy is what is essential to deliver on the essential services that Australians rely on. That's the guarantee for Medicare. That's the guarantee for pharmaceutical benefit scheme. That's the guarantee for the pension. It's not guaranteed by the empty promises of the Leader of the Opposition. It's guaranteed by the strong economic management of a Turnbull government that has a plan for a stronger economy that can deliver those essential services and guarantee them that Australians rely on. So I was pleased to join the member for Dunkley at Frankston Hospital with the Minister for Health, where we could meet with Ali and Georgie, her mum, who will be benefiting from the listing of Spinraza. Spinraza, that provides real hope for young Australians who suffer from spinal muscular atrophy. But it wasn't just Ali and Georgie who we're supporting, Mr Speaker. It is also the support that we've given for Georgie Fife-Jamieson. Now, Georgie Fife-Jamieson is on a trial for Kisqali. Now, Kisqali is a breast cancer drug, and that is being provided under the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme at a cost of just over $700 million. That's what you can do, Mr Speaker, with a stronger economy. You can guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. But it's also about delivering the infrastructure that is necessary. As the member for Dunkley knows, the electrification of the Baxter to Franklin line is going to be a big game changer for people who live in his electorate. It means that commuters can get to jobs. It means that patients can get to that hospital at Frankston, Mr Speaker, on public transport, on the electrification of that line, and I want to commend the member for Dunkley for his tireless advocacy to ensuring that this critical congestion-busting infrastructure in Melbourne is being delivered by the Turnbull government. But also we were there with the Seaford Senior Citizens Club, and we were down at John Paul College as well. And we were talking about the commitments we're making for ageing Australians, whether it's on the in-home aged care places, 20,000 and the like. But I tell you what they reminded us of when we were there, just how much they resent the Labor Party for coming after their retirement savings, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition is looking to swipe the tax refunds of hard-working Australians, Mr Speaker. He's got his hands in their pockets and he'll never take them out of them.
Members on both sides. The member for Hotham has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In its budget 2 weeks ago, did the government account for its secret deal with Senator Pauline Hanson?
The Leader of the House. Members on my left. Members on my left. The member for Moreton. The Leader of the House has the call.
Mr Speaker, how can the Prime Minister answer a question about a complete hypothetical dressed up as a question about the budget? And there is no question in the member for Hotham's question, because there is no such thing as the deal she talks about, and no one has confirmed there's such a thing. So therefore the question is based on an entirely spurious hypothetical matter.
Just before I will call the Manager of Opposition Business, and if those sitting behind both the Leader of the House and the Manager of Opposition Business could contain their interjections, I'll be able to hear both of them, and they're entitled to be heard in the roles they have, and I can make a judgment. Just before I call the Manager of Opposition Business, I would point out one aspect of the Leader of the House's point of order, and that is his claim about the factual accuracy of questions. I'm not in a position to judge those. Otherwise, we'd be, suspending while I considered each question 5 minutes at a time. But the Manager of Opposition Business on the point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. To the point of order. At no stage has the government disputed that this agreement exists. At no stage have they disputed that the document exists. The question goes to whether or not money has been appropriated within the budget to account for that agreement. You can't get anything, I think, more within the standing orders than that. The only agreement or document we're not allowed to ask about is a coalition agreement. If the government wants to argue this one's a coalition agreement, then they're welcome to make that case.
Just to the Manager of Opposition Business, the member for Isaacs isn't helping. Can I just say, again, as the Manager of Opposition Business articulated it, that made perfect sense to me, but the question wasn't that clear. It didn't go to a policy issue. Yeah, I'll allow the member for Hotham to ask the question again. No, that's not the point I'm making. The point that I'm quite capable of knowing the question mentioned. Well, you should ignore the Leader of the House. Okay, it's just on these interjections. The point I was making is the connection to the budget. So the member. Well, no, the member for Hotham can repeat her question.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. In its budget 2 weeks ago, did the government account for its secret deal with Senator Pauline Hanson?
No, well, that's out of order because it's referring to just a secret deal. It's not. I'm sorry. Member for Hotham can resume her seat. No. Members can cease interjecting. The member for Hotham can resume her seat. No, the member for Hotham's expecting me as Speaker to draw a connection with earlier questions. I know what she's trying to do, but I'm not going to do that. The member for Dawson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on recent announcements of nation-building, job-creating regional infrastructure, including in Northern Australia? And is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The member for Dawson will resume his seat. The Leader of the House is warned. The member for Dawson will repeat his question again so I can hear it.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on recent announcements of nation-building, job-creating regional infrastructure, including in Northern Australia? And is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the member for Dawson for his well-asked question, Mr Speaker, and I acknowledge him for his advocacy for Queensland and specifically for the electorate of Dawson. Mr Speaker, recently I visited the electorate of Dawson with the member, and we visited the Horton River floodplain area where there's going to be a project built there, more than $500 million, $514.3 million for the Horton River floodplain, construction of an upgraded Horton River bridge, including 13 additional bridges, 2 overpasses and an upgrade of 9 rural intersections and road widening. This is an important project, and the member for Morton can yell all he likes, but this is an important project for Queenslanders. It's going to save lives. It's going to connect regional communities. But don't take my word for it. The Burdekin Shire Mayor, Lynn McLaughlin, said the upgrade was long overdue. She said the project is not just about the Burdekin. This is a route that links southern Queensland with the north, and the ability to access it at all times is vital. And it's vital infrastructure being delivered by the Turnbull government. Projects such as the Horton River floodplain will boost local economies and create jobs. And guess what? We've created, yes, that's right, 1 million jobs. I said yesterday it was exciting. 1 million jobs. Very, very exciting. This government is delivering through our nation-building $75 billion 10-year infrastructure pipeline, focusing on creating local jobs. $3.5 billion worth of roads of strategic importance. $1.5 billion of that is dedicated to Northern Australia. The pipeline is going to support 50,000 direct and indirect jobs. Our informed, our diligent investment is creating jobs across the nation, especially in Northern Australia. $1.5 billion, as I say, dedicated to Northern Australia under the Roads of Strategic Importance. $600 million Northern Australia Roads program. That'll help Dawson. That'll help all our Queenslanders. Certainly it's going to create hundreds of jobs. Additional $160 million to seal and widen priority sections of the iconic Outback Way, called Australia's shortcut, indeed, between Winton, Queensland and Laverton, WA. I tell you what, it's more than just a shortcut, it's a vital linking road. $180 million towards upgrading Central Arnhem Road and up to $100 million to improve the Bunteen Highway. I was there with Minister Scullion the other day talking that up in Darwin. And last week I visited northern Queensland with the member for Leichhardt to talk up the Mareeba-Dimboola water supply scheme, as well as Senator McDonald. They're vital projects. $11.6 million towards modernisation of that project, 4.5 kilometres of new pressurised pipeline. That's what we're doing. We're getting on with building roads, building rail. We're not just about putting down bitumen to the media releases those opposite were when they were in government.
The member for Hotham.
I think that worked better.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. And I refer to previous answers concerning the government's secret deal with Senator Pauline Hanson. In its budget 2 weeks ago, did the government account for and make provision for this secret deal?
The Treasurer has the
Speaker,
call.
I thank the member through the Prime Minister for the question regarding what was accounted for in this year's budget. I'll tell you what was accounted for in this year's budget. The surplus coming in 1 year earlier, Mr. Speaker. That's what was accounted for in this year's budget. Net debt peaking this year and falling by $30 billion over the next 4 years, Mr. Speaker. That's what was accounted for in this year's budget. Net debt over the next 4 years, because it's a plan for a stronger economy. What's planned for in this budget is to deliver tax relief for working Australians.
Is in the budget. He is not being directly relevant to the question.
The member for McMahon will resume his seat. The member for McMahon will resume his seat. I've said to him before he needs to state the point of order. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget also accounts for backer investments in a 21st century medical industry. There are investments in the training of Australians. Mr. Speaker, this budget budgets for guaranteeing you know how to protect the borders. That's what we know how to do. Maybe the member for McMahon wants to take a point of order on protecting our borders, Mr. Speaker. He could talk about the...
Whilst the question was fairly broad on accounting for things in the budget, the Treasurer has now strayed way off the topic of the question. Way off.
Let me bring it back to the fifth point. The fifth point is this is a budget because that's what Labor's tax plans will do to our economy. We will keep taxes under our speed limit. Expenditure as a share of the economy falls to 24.7%, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that knows how to live within its means. The Labor Party, every time they get into office, the Australian people know they cannot be trusted with money because they cannot live within their means. This budget accounts for a plan for a stronger economy that delivers more jobs, that protect...
That it's fundamental to have a strong economy to deliver essential services, and that if you have a plan for an economy and you deliver 1 million jobs, then that's how you're able to deliver outcomes. We can deliver record funding for Medicare with an additional $4.8 billion, record funding for aged care with an additional $5 billion. Is in this budget we are delivering that support for hospitals. Funding goes each year from $21 billion to $22 billion to $23 billion to $24 billion. Well, we will call out Labor's lies, and let me refer to it specifically. I did, over the weekend, go through Queensland activity years. Queensland funding to its own hospitals went up 8%. Over the last 3 years, Commonwealth funding to its own... Queensland funding over the last 3 years went up by 4%. Commonwealth funding went up by 38%, more than ninefold the rate.
His secret deal with Senator Pauline Hanson to secure his company tax cuts.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Calm, consistent policies that support companies, support workers and employers. Policies and employees. Policies like the Australian saved consumers $7.5 billion, and it increased productivity in building and construction by 16.8%, Mr. Speaker. So it had a real impact the first time it was in existence, on the economy. Labor promptly abolished it, Mr Speaker, but this government brought it back. And
the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that since the last election the government has gifted Senator Pauline Hanson and
the Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, as it turns out, I am aware of those risks, and I thank the member for that. We now have a majority of caucus members, a majority of Labor Party members, who are opposed to stopping the votes. Mr Scott, the secret dodgy deal that's just beneath the surface. The fact is, Mr Speaker, this Leader of the Opposition will never control the left of the Labor Party when it—
The Leader of the House.
I move the member be no longer heard, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the House has moved the Manager of Opposition business be no further heard. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no.